In other words, he rejects the best part of the Constitution and retains the worst part, which permitted slavery by endorsing the concept of the dictatorship of the majority while failing to protect inalienable and individual rights. Fletcher's obvious goal is to promote the new Constitution, nationhood, equality, and pure democracy while burying the notion of the republic, protection of individual liberty, and the rights of the minority. His main goal is to reject the notion that the people ultimately are the guarantors of the Constitution, the bestowers of legitimacy. His final conclusion is that the states and the people no longer retains rights and powers, thus clearly and forcefully repealing the 9th and 10th Amendments. With these gone, the people have no claims to real control over the government. What then is left for the people? They are still permitted, as Fletcher says, to be the voters, office holders, and the beneficiaries of legislation. The theme of this devastating article is that it enforces the idea that government does not get its power from the consent of the people and makes the citizen a creature of the state, with the government no longer being a creation of the people through a voluntary social contract. Fletcher is quite accurate when he admits the original Constitution strictly limited government power. But subsequent legislation and court rulings, he argues, now permit intervention into the private affairs of citizens. This, of course, has led to the modern-day federal police state where there are tens of thousands of federal regulations and laws. The administrative courts are now in charge, for the most part, outside of constitutional protections. It is neither a coincidence nor an accident, as Fletcher brags, that we have arrived and can legalistically defend big government and justify it. He says this necessitates an activist federal government committed to preserving equality. According to Fletcher, the welfare state and the force required to redistribute wealth is therefore justified, thus planting the seeds of a totalitarian state which will come in due time if the course of events are not changed. Fletcher is quite pleased to show that the new Constitution permits the income tax and all post-Depression welfare programs. And the prevailing theme of the whole article is that anybody who objects is a McVeigh. The concern for illegitimate use of force is absent from his discussion. Unfortunately, this article speaks for many in government, especially in our courts. But interestingly enough, it represents one of the very few honest articles arguing very clearly that the old Constitution and the old Republic are archaic and should be buried. But ignoring the Constitution is not enough. We intellectually and philosophically must now reject it according to this new Republic's theme. And anyone who disagrees will be guilty by association with those who would use violence against innocent people. Supporters of the modern-day gargantuan state never cared much for the original intent of the Constitution, which severely restricts the power of the federal government. They are quite aware the doctrine of enumerated powers prohibits the federal government from almost everything it's currently doing. To undermine the original intent of the Constitution, to limit the federal government, promoters of big government knew it would take constitutional amendment, court rulings, and constant legislative action, and even war to accomplish it. It is possible that their task is complete. Is it possible that their task is complete and essentially a new Constitution has now replaced the old? Is this the reason for their boldness? Many friends of freedom constantly worry that a constitutional convention to pass a balanced budget amendment poses a great danger because of the chance that at such a gathering the Constitution would be rewritten. Of course, there is no need for a constitutional convention, but the fear of losing our rights at one should be replaced with a concern for the changes ongoing with the present one. If Fletcher is right, the new Constitution is already in place. Not a literal one, but the one that we now follow has so radically changed that the framers' original intent is no longer recognizable nor desirable by many. Never have I read any article so forthright about the intent of the modern-day social reformers. The boldness with which Fletcher buries the old Constitution should cause alarm for anyone interested in the experiment in freedom started in America more than 200 years ago. By using this, the only significant flaw in the 1789 document, slavery, Fletcher throws out every good thing intended by the Constitution while preserving its own one major shortcoming, majoritarianism that permitted slavery in the first place. Fletcher's love of the dictatorship of the majority to guarantee economic equality for all while ignoring the principles of individual liberty permits him to elevate the flaw which permitted the slavery compromise to the highest plane possible. In doing so, all the grand elements of the old Constitution are effectively denied. Getting relief from the oppression of the old Constitution, according to this article, with the Civil War and the subsequent changes thereafter, elevated the national government, and especially the federal courts, to a point far superior to the states and the people. But the new republic is not alone in expressing grave concern about the growing interest and understanding of jury nullification. It is now more commonly discussed on television special programs and in newspapers like the New York Times. A recent court case prompted an appeals court to warn us of the great danger of the fully informed jury and granted more power to judges to curtail this growing phenomenon. And it is not only the political right they are concerned about. Minority groups on the left are using jury nullification more frequently than in recent memory. It is not so much that the opponents of nullification are opposed to the goals of the left, it's that they fear the growing interest in jury nullification in the groups dedicated to the original intent interpretation of the Constitution may use it successfully. If the old Constitution is dead and the new one is now in place, the last thing they need is to have a bunch of uninhibited citizens expressing themselves through the common law practice of jury nullification. It is therefore in their interests, even if it requires attacking the left as well as the right, to stop this movement as quickly as possible. Just because it was part of our history for more than 100 years means nothing. Promoting a powerful state, which includes an authoritarian judiciary and even an ever-present bureaucracy, is of greater importance to them. This most recent victory for the promoters of the new Constitution, which includes further attack on jury nullification, occurred in the Manhattan's appeals court in May. In the ruling, the court denounced the practice of jury nullification. Judge Jose Cabrera said, "To practice jury nullification is a violation of a juror's duty to follow instruction of the court." The case involved nonviolent drug possession. Although the appeals court permitted the innocent verdict to stand, the court was emphatic that judges do have a right and an obligation to investigate a juror's motivation on a vote of acquittal. Our history shows that this process helped prevent fugitive slaves from being sent back south before the Civil War period. John Peter Zenger, a colonial publicist, was freed by his peers on charges of sedition through this same process. The practice of jury nullification during the 20s helped force the repeal of alcohol prohibition once the majority of the people realized that the laws were irrational and abusive. Liberal black professors from George Washington University and Harvard are now urging jury nullification to promote civil rights in the courts. If this move to urge judges to judge all jurors' motivation is carried out, the process of jury secrecy will be a thing of the past, and trial by jury just may be the last chance we have for revoking some of our federal legislative monstrosities. Congress has been irresponsible in this regard.